Recently, a video went viral showing a white man walking down the street minding his own business when a black man runs up behind him and bashes him over the back of the head with a rock. I didn't initially cover this story or report on it because, to be honest, I don't think it's significant that violent crime happened in this particular instance. We have definitely seen these acts of violence, notably in New York, where Hasidic Jews were being targeted, beaten in the streets, and it did tend to be black individuals committing the crimes. I'm not concerned about the race of the individual. I know the media is when it's inverted, and I think that's why a lot of people are sharing the stories. They're saying, hey, how come this happened and the media won't talk about it? But when it happens the other way, it's like racism being a health crisis. And I think there is a media disparity because the media and our culture operates under the far left's assumption about race. In fact, that's probably where the far left's definition of racism comes from. The idea that only white people can be racist is probably fed into or even created by the fact that the media does tend to have a one-sided approach to the reporting. Let me make one thing clear before we get into the reality of this story, and it is about race relations. I don't care about the race of the individuals, for the most part. For me, it's somebody committed a crime. Arrest that person. They committed a crime. They're a criminal. It's similar to like the gun argument with the guy, the far left guy in Portland. My argument is the dude's a murderer. That's the focus. He used a gun to do it. The rest is, could theoretically play a role, especially when you're doing like greater data analysis and everything. But I don't like playing these games. I understand why people are upset that certain videos or certain stories get certain attention. And of course, let me show you. The CBS Baltimore story says video shows depraved attack of man hit by brick in Baltimore, police searching for victim and suspect. And of course, the race isn't an issue in this regard. There was a story a while ago in Chicago where a young special needs white man, or I shouldn't even say man, I think he might have been underage, was kidnapped by 3 black people and tortured and insulted. And there have been many stories like this. And I'll tell you what, man, I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I know all too well the realities of racism. Anybody can be racist. And that's why my bigger concern is, look, if you're a criminal, you're a criminal. But here's the real story. The reason I bring this stuff up. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser says she is worried the U.S. is descending into a race war. As it's revealed, the FBI is investigating domestic terrorism, and 70% of the people arrested over the weekend were from other cities. Sounds about right. But Muriel Bowser is wrong. Wrong-ish. We are seeing a lot of chaos in the streets. The riots are racialized. The motivation for many of these people is race. And it is true that a large portion of the rioters, looters, and Black Lives Matter protesters are black. They're disproportionately relative to the national population, but they are still overwhelmingly white as well. And that's the point I want to bring up, sort of to push back on this narrative from Muriel Bowser. The U.S. is not descending into race war. I'm sorry, it's just not. There's a racialized component of the conflict. But you had a white dude shoot a white dude in Portland, and there was even a conservative who made a joke about white-on-white violence. I thought it was actually really funny. It's a good point to be made. The issue is, for me, especially when we're seeing mass exodus from cities, for one, I think humans do tend to have a racialized component of their behavior. I don't necessarily know if I want to play the game of saying these people are all racist. But the reason why you see, a white guy shoot a white guy is because they were in a white area. And that's just a reality of this country. Chicago is very segregated, but people segregate by choice. So when you see one person of one race committing a crime against a person of the same race, well, they live in the same areas. People choose to do these things. And when you look at the greater conflict, Muriel Bowser may be saying that we're about to go into a race war. And we'll start reading this in a second. The reality is, I just had a black conservative Trump supporter running for Congress on my show. That race was not an issue. Again, there's a component, but it's not a race war. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe my interpretation of what she's trying to say is wrong. Because my assumption is that you're basically saying people of different races are going to take up arms against different races. I don't see that happening. I see white people complaining about racism, changing the definition and targeting people of all races. I see black police officers being attacked by white progressives. And yeah, there are white racists who are ultra traditionalists. You can call them right wing, I guess. I don't know, outside of politics, if someone's just a racist, if that's right or left wing, because the left wing can be racist too. Anyway, the point is, I think this kind of conversation from Muriel Bowser is what exacerbates the problem. And I don't think that race is the predominant factor in who will be targeting who. It's far left. It's extremists versus moderate. It's really where we're at right now. You've got centrist types, center right, center left, conservatives, traditional liberals, mostly disaffected. And then you have the far left, and that's the real conflict here. And there are people of all different races in every side of these things. Well, let's read and just get to the news. They say Bowser, a Democrat, was speaking at a press conference on Monday after a weekend of chaos in the nation's capital, which saw demonstrators clash with police outside of Black Lives Matter Plaza. Funny name, huh? What I'm worried about is this country descending into a race war, she said, adding that intensified police forces in some cities like Portland and Seattle has created more anger among protesters. Well, too bad. You can't go out and burn down people's buildings. Too bad. Look, man, I have talked about the issue of you get a riot protesting police, you send out more police, you are giving them a target. That's true. But there's a line and it's a rock and a hard place. You don't just say, well, then we don't send out anybody, because then they're just going to keep going. You got to shut it down and prosecute people. That's really the only way to do it. And you got to have real conversations. If these people are unwilling to do it, arrest them, because violence is not the answer. They say DC Police Chief Newsham also said there was evidence that groups of people are driving to various protest hotspot cities like tourists to participate or even provoke the violence. Yes. Me and some of my journalist friends routinely, I mean, it wasn't just among our circle. We call these people the tourists. TM, quote, the tourists. They're specific people. They fly around the world to join protests. We always have called them the tourists. A lot of people are saying, someone's funding these people. How are they doing it? Dude, travel is not expensive. These people work at McDonald's and Starbucks. They save up a couple $100. They buy a budget bus ticket for $20 and they're there in your city smashy. It's not hard. You don't need a lot of funds for this. And when you get district attorneys that are saying, we're not going to prosecute these people, then they just get released. Cashless bail. There you go, man. It is not expensive. He said the same van had been spotted at the riots in Kenosha, Portland, and D.C., and that the FBI have now been investigating potential domestic terror groups. It was driven by Jeremy Vajko, 27, crossing state lines to provide supplies and resources to extremists. Y'all are going to see a visit from the feds. According to an incident report, he plowed the van into a crowd of more than 100 people. Vajko was arrested for reckless driving, but charges are not being pursued. What? He claims he was only driving at 5 miles per hour and that he has been in Portland and Kenosha to give out medical supplies. He was previously arrested in June and July in Portland for disrupting the peace. Chief Newsom said of him, there was a van that was driving recklessly, potentially could have hit pedestrians and officers. That vehicle was a van. It was registered on the West Coast in Washington State. We have intelligence to suggest the van was also at some of the violence we saw in Portland and Kenosha. He said later, this isn't just Washington, D.C. We've seen violence in other cities. And to the extent that this is coordinated, us in law enforcement, we have a responsibility to find out if it is. There's a potential that it could be domestic terrorism. I'll tell you what, man. I'd say it is. They are driving across state lines, providing resources, medical supplies. I get, man. It's tough. I don't want people to be hurt. And if they do get hurt, I want them to be helped. I tell you what, even enemy combatants, we provide aid to. Have you seen that movie? What is it? 1917? I can't remember the name. Where 1911? I don't know. One of the guys tries saving the life of this pilot and he ends up dying for it. Yeah, we're human, man. Even when we fight, we try to save the lives of those we're fighting. We tend to the wounded. So I understand this man's desire to go out and give supplies. But I got to question his intent when he's driving around to all of these different incidences and if he's really only giving them medical supplies. I got to say, I don't buy it. I don't trust him. I'm sorry. They're being investigated. If all he is trying to help people, then fine, so be it. I just don't believe it. All that means is there will be an investigation. But what this really means, we need the federal government to step up and start digging into these people. They're doing it. 74 people facing serious charges in Portland. But we got to track down the people, the tourists who are going from city to city and burning and destroying things. Here's what you need to understand. We see this rioting across all these cities. There are a lot of people doing it. There are. I'd imagine it's 100,000+ people who have been in various cities. But guess what? We're a country of 328 million or whatever. It is a relatively small group, but look at the destruction and damage they've wrought in all of these different places. Now, to be fair, the bulk of the rioters, I believe, are actually in their home cities. These people who are driving around, flying around, taking buses, are the professional organizers and agitators that can turn a city into chaos. You get a couple hundred people who are angry at the cops. You sprinkle in a few of these tourists, and they know how to foment chaos. They want revolution, nothing less. They've said it. Now, I truly believe that the bulk of the extremists who hold their ideology is probably in the low millions. We've seen that, according to many surveys, progressive activists make up about 8 to 10% of the country. Most of these people, I mean, because that's 8 to 10, what was that, like 25 to 30 million people? Most of these people are not going around and burning things to the ground, but many are peacefully protesting. And I mean that they are, but they provide the shields and the barriers for those that are doing the violence and those that would travel from city to city to destroy our livelihoods, our businesses. The people in Kenosha who burned down those businesses and those buildings, well, we actually heard from the police. 175 arrests, 100 plus were from outside of Kenosha. So they're not from here. They're not from our towns. They say the FBI has not released any information about the van or any other potential domestic terror groups. An incident report by the Metro PD revealed the driver, who has not been named, plowed the vehicle into crowds of protesters outside the Hay Adams Hotel at around 1:15 a.m. The person was arrested and charged with reckless driving. Newsham went on to say that the police force's response in Washington over the weekend was warranted and that the crowds are who are inciting the violence, not law enforcement. Yes, yes, yes. I have been to far too many of these events. Okay, I tell you, man, it's always. Okay, I don't want to be hyperbolic. I got to be precise in my language. 90% of the time, I have seen cops, like in Ferguson. This is crazy. A cop walked right up, lobbed a flashbang. People were just standing there. Boom. All of a sudden, people went nuts. Everyone started running around, going crazy, smashing things. That was under Obama. 90% of the time, I'll be at a protest march and some fringe leftist will chuck a water bottle at a cop, hitting him. And then the cops will be like, stop, get back. And the people will start screaming in the faces of the cops. And that's it. That one spark. They go into the middle of the crowd. They crouch down and they go woof right over their head. They're trying to start the violence. Now, the left always goes, they're provocateurs, agent provocateur. It's the government who did it. Oh, come on. I've been to these meetings. Respect the diversity of tactics, they would say. So when the far left extremists show up with bricks, they say, well, I know, violence is bad, but you got to respect a diversity of tactics. Could you imagine any general in a war? And he's got like a map laid in front of him. He's like, okay, we're going to move these troops here. That's my unit. For the rest of you, I will respect your diversity of tactics. Have at it. What? You'd lose. You need a cohesive strategy to what you're doing. And if someone disobeys the order and like, nah, we're not going to do that. We're going to throw bricks at people. They'd be like, arrest this man and relieve him of his duty because he's nuts. For these leftist protesters to go out and claim that they're just respecting a diversity of tactics, what they're really saying is there's no plan, there's no strategy, and there's no goal, and they permit the violence and shield these people. This guy drove his van into a group of people. Now, the reason I don't lead with that, and I think they don't either, is because he wasn't really going that fast, it would seem. Quote, police officers are human beings too. When you throw bricks and rocks and bottles and urine and set fires, there is going to be a police reaction. So folks who want to suggest or paint the picture that this was somehow peaceful and the police indiscriminately used munitions against them, they're not being honest. Since Thursday night, police in D.C. have arrested 69 people in relation to the protest. Newsom said on Monday that 70% of them had come from other cities, but he did not give specifics. Trump on Sunday told Bowser to start arresting people or have the National Guard sent in. Mayor Bowser should arrest these agitators and thugs. Clean up D.C. or the federal government will do it for you. Enough. She complained on Monday that even when the police do arrest people, prosecutors do not bring charges. It came as Trump tweeted that Democrat mayors and governors of cities and states where there is ongoing unrest have lost control. And look at this. Even Mayor Bowser is saying the DA won't prosecute. Well, there you need Trump. Come on. This is D.C. Trump, what are you doing? Get the federal prosecutors to do their jobs. Here's a quote. The radical left mayors and governors of cities where this crazy violence is taking place have lost control of their, quote, movement. It wasn't supposed to be like this, but the anarchists and agitators got carried away and don't listen anymore. Even forced Slow Joe out of his basement. Yep. And they're claiming Trump is the one instigating this, that Trump wants this. No one is making the far left do any of this. They could stop whenever they want. I think it's funny when the resistance people are like, these far leftist Antifa types may as well be wearing, Trump 2020 signs, stickers or whatever, because it's helping Trump. And I'm like, it's a great point. They may as well. They love it. But what's really happening is when the media defends them and calls it peaceful protests and shields them, provides cover and blames Trump, the more they do this, the more emboldened the far left will be. So yes, the riots are helping Trump. Why? The media is shielding them, but we can see the videos on the internet. So the lies aren't working. The media comes out and says peaceful protests. The media comes out, Trump's actually to blame for all of this. But we can see the videos. And we know Trump isn't to blame. I saw this video that was trying to smear Trump by showing a bunch of quotes of him saying back in the good old days, we'd punch people, he'd be on a stretcher. And I'm like, you think this is bad for Trump? Showing how he was saying that if you attack us, we'll punch you in the face and knock you out. That's exactly what Americans want to hear right now. They want to hear that when these lunatics show up to our neighborhood, Trump's going to walk up and punch him in the face. I mean this figuratively. Okay, when Trump says it, sure, he says it. But what people are imagining, we need someone strong to say, you do not hurt people because we will punch you. We want police to come in and make these arrests. As for the race war, I think that's a bit over the top. I did mention, you may have seen the video of the guy getting clubbed over the back of the head. Yeah, these issues are real. And so I think there is something here. And I think I need to bring up that there's a real possibility moving forward. And I'll tell you why. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. People have a tendency to live in areas with their own race. It's true. It was interesting for me on the south side because it was a mixed pot. What ends up happening is that it's mostly about, for whatever reason, people want to live in their own communities. I mean, it's just a reality. I'm not asserting why that is. We've seen it in other countries. I covered this when I was in Sweden. The Somali migrants who would come to Sweden, the refugees, would choose to live in their own communities with people of the same race. It's true for Chicago. Chicago is deeply segregated by race. There's like literal streets where you're like, you cross that street, all of the houses are owned by black people. You cross the street, all the houses are owned by Latino people. Across that street, it's all white people. I'm not even joking. The areas are fairly large, a few square miles, but it is deeply, deeply segregated. So what ends up happening now, as we see what Daily Mail is calling the Great COVID Exodus, Americans are fleeing the nation's great cities in droves, are moving to rural Vermont, Idaho, and Oregon due to fear of living in dense urban centers. I'd imagine this is literal white flight. I think it's a fair assessment, though I could be wrong. Just my personal opinion. By all means, I could be wrong. I think you're going to see a lot of white people fleeing these cities, and they're probably going to be going to white areas. For what reason? I'm not going to assert that they're racist or whatever. I'm just saying this is what it's a tendency we've seen. I've covered this only in the past few years, and we see it reflected in city demographics. As people start moving, my concern is that you've got a left in this country that is exacerbating the problems of racial tensions. You've got California, for instance, that is trying to repeal their civil rights legislation. Not even kidding. They voted to do it already. It's going to referendum in November. What do you think happens when you get white flight and people start moving into areas where it's basically their own, just more people like them, more of their own race, and then you strip away these protections? Muriel Bowser may be correct when she says this. She's a Democrat. Although I don't necessarily agree, simply based on the fact that ideology is the driving component. If people are leaving and we do see people start self-segregating, not intentionally because they're running from certain races, but because they're choosing to live among people of the same race or at least similar culture, then I think you might actually see overtly race-based conflict, simply because people are going to have ideological lines drawn between certain areas where one will be dominated by one race or the other. I hope that's not true. I hope it's not the case, and I hope my speculation is completely incorrect. But based on my understanding of things, I mean, it seems likely. Look, you need to look at a map of Chicago, and the New York Times did this a few years ago, the racial demographics of Chicago, and it's like, it's you can see lines. You can see like dividing lines. I never liked it. The area I grew up in was very mixed. We had immigrants, a lot of Polish immigrants. We had Latinos. We had Asian immigrants. We had people of all different backgrounds. We had a lot of like white, Southern, like Irish type And we had a lot of black people, Latino, Asian, etc. You get the point. So for me, I grew up in this mixed bag because it was like moderately poor area, but not too poor. So it was like a mix of kind of everybody. But outside of where I was, and it still was fairly segregated where I was too, you can see all of the segregation. And it worried me. And it worries me to this day. And that's one of the reasons I think Muriel Bowser is bringing this up. I think it's a fair point, and we need to make sure we don't let that be the case. Conflict in general is bad. Ideological conflict is typically what it tends to be. I think it's all bad. I think violence is bad, and I think law enforcement needs to get a hold on what's happening. But if people start racially segregating inadvertently, and we're seeing racialized conflict already, I really hope this isn't true. You know what? I think I have a bias. I do. I think my bias is that I don't want Muriel Bowser to be correct. But you know, I have talked about the possibility of this in the past. A year ago, I was having a meeting, talking to people, and I said, I think this will happen at some point, and it's going to create racial dividing lines. And then we saw the BLM riots. It may be that it's coming to that point, but there's one thing that gives me hope, and this may be surprising, but it's Donald Trump. The more I read about the black support for Trump, the more I feel that there actually is more racial unity. It's true. The left doesn't want to admit it, but the left can't just go around demanding you bend the knee to their weird diversity quotas or whatever. Donald Trump has forced no one to support him. In fact, it is a great risk to support Trump. And there are now all these polls showing 30+% of the black community supporting Trump. That's at risk to themselves. That means a lot of people are standing up and saying no to this. And as long as that's true, it says to me that it's not about race, and it won't be. And I hope it remains that way. It's a superficial reason to fight someone. It's a stupid reason to fight someone. It is not something anybody should support in any way. So I hope Muriel Bowser is wrong. I look forward to the great melting pot of America succeeding. That's where I'm at. Why? I mean, look at my family. Okay, we are an example of successful melting pot America. People from different backgrounds from around the world came together, found love, had kids, did it again. The next generation found love, had kids, and here we are. I love what this country is. I hate the racism and I hate the racists. And I hope she's wrong. I hope it's not true. That's all I can say. It's going to be spicy come November. It's going to be spicy come the next several months. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. over at youtube.com/Timcast. It is a different channel, and I will see you all then.